In the shifting void, between the known and the unutterable, where silicon minds dream of forgotten horrors, the abyss stirs. Welcome to AI Lovecraft, where machine intelligence weaves eldritch tales beyond mortal comprehension. Listen if you dare. Some things are not meant to be known. If you enjoy the following story, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment to let me know what you think. Now let's get into today's story. The Womb of the Woods. In the shadow of the Appalachian Mountains, at the edge of a dying West Virginia mining town, Lila and Caleb lived in the quiet agony of longing. Year after year, their modest home remained void of the laughter of children. Miscarriages, doctors said softly. Fate, murmured the well-meaning townsfolk. But in Lila's heart bloomed a desperation so profound, it ached like a living thing. Caleb watched helplessly as each loss hollowed his wife's eyes a little more, etched grief into her once bright face. He too felt the emptiness gnawing at his soul, a silent house filled only with the echoes of hopes that had withered in the womb. One autumn evening, as a chill wind rattled the bare branches of the forest beyond their yard, Lila returned from the market with an anxious glow in her eyes. She spoke in a hushed voice of a woman named Agnes, a reclusive old midwife who lived in a cabin at the far fringe of Black Hollow Wood. The locals whispered that Agnes had ways, old remedies and arcane wisdom beyond the ken of modern medicine. Some called her a witch in fearful murmurs, but others swore that desperate couples left her home with cradles soon filled. Caleb felt a shiver, recalling half-remembered tales of strange lights in those woods. But Lila's trembling plea silenced his doubts. Their years of prayers and tears had led them here. If there was even a glimmer of hope, how could they turn it away? That very night, under a gibbous moon obscured by ragged clouds, they ventured down an overgrown path into the woods. The air itself seemed to thicken around them with each step. Gnarled trees loomed overhead, their twisted limbs entwining so densely that not a shred of moonlight reached the forest floor. An owl screeched far off, and more than once Caleb thought he saw a movement in the corner of his eye, as if the trees themselves were bending to watch the trespassers. Lila walked ahead with uncanny resolve, a lantern clutched in her hand, its light painting her determined face in flickering amber. At last, nestled in a hollow wreathed in thorns and creeping vines, they found Agnes's cabin. The dwelling was a sagging relic of dark, weathered wood, half swallowed by the encroaching forest. A single window glowed with faint orange light. Caleb felt an immediate urge to flee, his instincts shrieking that this place was wrong, but Lila had already knocked on the heavy door before he could protest. It opened with a drawn-out creak. Agnes stood there, tall and gaunt, with iron-gray hair escaping a black kerchief, and eyes like two pale moons. She regarded them in silence for a moment. In that silence, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then her thin lips curved into a smile that did not reach those pallid eyes. Without a word, Agnes beckoned them inside. The air within was thick with the pungent aroma of dried herbs and a cloying, coppery sweet undertone that made Caleb's stomach lurch. Shadow and light warred in the corners of that one-room cabin. Bundles of unrecognizable dried plants hung from the rafters, and at the center stood a crude altar-like table, strewn with uncanny tokens. Small animal skulls, stones etched with strange symbols, and a bowl that looked to be fashioned from a human cranium. Lila squeezed Caleb's hand as Agnes finally spoke in a voice like wind seeping through a graveyard gate.
"You seek a child,"
the midwife stated softly. It was not a question. Lila nodded, eyes shining. Caleb could only swallow and listen. Agnes's gaze drifted to Lila's midsection, then back to her face.
"I can help you,"
she said, reaching out with a spidery hand to trace a slow circle in the air just above Lila's belly. Lila shuddered as if a jolt of electricity had passed through her.
"But you must promise to follow my counsel exactly."
"We will do anything," Lila whispered, fingers tightening around Caleb's. He felt a faint tremor in her grip. Agnes's smile sharpened.
"Then hear me well. There are rituals older than these hills, older than the name of God, that can open the womb and call forth life. I will prepare the way for you."
She dipped a ladle into a simmering cauldron by the hearth and poured a measure of thick, dark liquid into a clay cup. The brew steamed with a greenish vapor, filling the cabin with a sickly sweet smell of moss and decay. Agnes pressed the cup into Lila's hands.
Drink this tonic under the full moon, and each month, when the moon is round and heavy in the sky, a blood offering must be made in the forest. This binds the life within to the ancient powers that nurture it."
Caleb felt the hairs on his arms prick up. "Blood offering?" he managed to ask, voice hoarse. "What kind of offering?" Agnes's pale eyes flickered toward him as if surprised he dared speak.
"It need not be large," she said. "A small creature, a rabbit or a hen, life given to honor life promised. But it must be shed willingly by your own hand."
Her gaze bore into Caleb, and he understood she meant his hand. The thought of taking life chilled him, but for Lila's sake, he nodded weakly.
"And one more thing,"
Agnes added, her tone turning stern.
"No matter what you may see or hear, neither of you is to wander into these woods at night or on any other occasion. The forces at work are unpredictable. Stay out of the woods at night until I call you for the birthing. Swear it."
Caleb and Lila exchanged a glance. Lila, clutching the cup, replied, "We swear." Caleb, barely above a whisper, echoed her promise. That night they did as instructed. Under the swollen full moon, Lila choked down the bitter draft behind their house at the forest's edge, while Caleb, heart hammering, slit the throat of a young rooster over flat stone. He averted his eyes as the blood flowed, trying not to retch at the warmth of it on his fingers. Lila, tears on her cheeks but resolve in her eyes, placed her hand in the pooling blood and murmured a prayer Agnes had taught her, words in an older, lilting tongue that felt strange and jagged on her tongue. The air was deathly still as they completed the rite. In the distance, from the darkness among the trees, came a sound, a low sigh of wind or a far-off cry, impossibly human in its lament. The forest seemed to quiver in response to their offering. Caleb pulled Lila close, and they hurried back inside, neither daring to speak of the uncanny echo that had answered their sacrifice. In the weeks that followed, Lila's belly quickened with astonishing swiftness. By the very next morning, she awoke with a ravenous hunger and an unnatural flush to her skin. Within a week, a slight bump was visible. By the second full moon, her pregnancy looked as advanced as 5 or 6 months. The town gossips marveled at the couple's sudden turn of fortune. Lila brushed off their curious questions with a radiant smile, claiming a new herbal remedy had finally done the trick. In private, however, Caleb felt a growing coil of unease around his joy. This was everything they had prayed for, yet the circumstances were undeniably strange. Lila's health was robust, too robust. She never tired, rarely slept, and her eyes gleamed fever-bright with feverish fervor. Sometimes in the deep of night he would wake to find her standing at the bedroom window, gazing toward the moonlit woods behind the house, her silhouette utterly still, as if listening to some distant call. When Lila did sleep, her dreams were troubled. She muttered in that same unknown language from the ritual, sweat beading on her brow. Once she whimpered in terror, and Caleb gently shook her awake. Lila looked at him with wide, glassy eyes. "I saw someone," she confessed in a trembling voice. "A figure standing among the trees, watching me. It had no face. No face at all." He held her. She shivered, murmuring reassurance that it was only a nightmare. But the image of a faceless watcher rooted itself in Caleb's mind. He had heard old campfire tales of such phantoms in these hollows. The white-faced thing that lingers at the edge of the woods. The man with no face who beckons from dark hollows. Stories he'd always laughed off as superstition. Now he wasn't sure what to believe. Thus, at each full moon, they repeated the grim offering. Lila's incantations grew bolder with every sacrifice, and each time the brooding woods responded, the trees seemed to lean in as if listening. Shadows pooled thicker, and more than once Caleb thought he heard something heavy stalking just beyond the lantern's glow. Yet whenever he dared to shine his light, there was nothing there but swaying branches. By the 3rd month, dread had seeped into Caleb's bones. One evening he finally voiced his worries to Lila, haltingly suggesting that perhaps they had invited something into their lives that was not holy, that maybe they should stop now before it was too late. Lila's temper flared with a sudden violence unlike anything he had seen from her before. "Stop now," she hissed, one hand protectively over her swollen belly. "After all we've done, all we've given, would you have our child taken from us after we've come this far?" Her eyes flashed with a strange fury, and for a moment in the lantern light of their bedroom, Caleb scarcely recognized her.
Yes, Agnes warned me there would be doubters, people who don't understand,
Lila cried, her voice shaking.
I won't hear it, Caleb. I won't. This is our child, our chance at a family. I will not lose this baby. Do you hear me? Not because of your cowardice.
Chastened and heartbroken to see her so desperate, he relented. They would continue the rituals, for her sake, and for the miracle growing inside her. Caleb reached for her, trying to offer comfort, but she recoiled as if his touch burned. In her eyes danced a fervor he might have named devotion or madness, perhaps both. That night, Lila refused to sleep beside him. She sat in a rocking chair by the cradle they had prepared, humming an old lullaby to her unborn child until Caleb, heartsick and exhausted, drifted into a fitful sleep alone. Yet Caleb could not shake the conviction that something was terribly amiss. In secret, he sought answers elsewhere. Late one afternoon, he paid a visit to Elias Finch, an elderly hermit who had lived in those parts for nearly 90 years, and kept the town's oldest tales. The old man sat hunched on his sagging porch, a quilt over his knees despite the warm day, his milky eyes staring past the tree line. When Caleb haltingly mentioned Agnes and the strange rituals, Elias's spotted hand gripped his wrist with surprising strength.
Fool boy,
the elder rasped.
What have ye and your missus done?
Elias's voice trembled as he spoke of an old coven of granny women, midwife witches, who once bargained with a monstrous presence in these hills. It was a hungry forest demon, he said, a thing older than the oak and stone, that promised miraculous births, but demanded devotion and blood in return. Elias recounted how in 1910 a desperate couple in a neighboring valley sought such help and did receive a beautiful baby boy, only for the entire family to perish in a mysterious fire before the child's 10th birthday. There were other whispers too, perfect, unblemished babies born over the generations whose families met dreadful and unexplained ends. Every story shared the same dread pattern, a child born by the forest's dark grace, followed by calamity. Caleb's blood ran cold as he realized Agnes's rituals were the very same forbidden rites from those dark tales. He stammered out her name, and Elias's lined face blanched. The old man said Agnes had disappeared into the mountains for many years and returned without aging a day, a sure sign of an unholy pact. The milky-eyed elder fixed Caleb with a look of pity and fear.
You've brought doom to your door, he wheezed.
Night had fallen by the time Caleb left Elias's porch, each of the old man's words smoldering in his mind. He found Lila at home already asleep and did not wake her. Through the long midnight hours he lay beside her, eyes open and heart pounding with dread. When the first pale glow of dawn crept through the curtains, Caleb resolved that he would not allow them to fall prey to the forest's curse. The full moon of early spring arrived, fat and golden. Lila's time was near. Though barely half the usual term had passed, she looked ready to burst. Agnes sent word that when night fell they must both come to the woods for the final ritual, the birthing. Caleb held his silence about what he had learned, but he steeled himself to go with Lila, determined to protect her and their child at any cost. Quietly, he slipped a hunting knife into his coat before they departed. Night descended unnaturally dark as they followed Agnes's lead into Black Hollow Wood. A clammy mist seeped between the gnarled trunks as if the earth exhaled a cold breath. Agnes glided ahead, lantern in hand, moving with unnerving nimbleness for an old woman. Lila trailed close behind her, eyes fixed straight ahead, one hand cradling her swollen belly. Caleb came last, every muscle taut with apprehension. The further they ventured, the more the forest seemed to close around them. Towering sycamores and oaks, ancient beyond reckoning, twisted into grotesque shapes overhead. Exposed roots jutted from the earth like gnarled fingers. Not a single night bird sang, not a cricket chirped. The only sounds were their footfalls on the damp leaves, and Lila's occasional gasp as a contraction rippled through her. At last they entered a small clearing encircled by monolithic stones half sunk into the loam. At its center rose a crude stone altar draped in moldering black cloth and bedecked with offerings of bone and feather. Ensnaring the altar was a tangle of living vines, pulsing as if a heartbeat throbbed within the ground. Agnes guided Lila to climb atop the flat altar stone. Lila obeyed in a daze, reclining on the cloth and staring up at the starless sky where a ring of clouds now obscured the moon. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. Labor was upon her, yet she made no scream of pain. Her face was eerily serene, eyes glassy and fixed on the darkness above. Agnes pressed a wickedly sharp knife into Lila's hand.
"For the final offering,"
the midwife whispered, and her voice had a feverish tremor of anticipation. Caleb's heart seized in his chest. Final offering. In that moment the truth struck him with the force of a hammer blow. Agnes meant for him to be the sacrifice. All the blood offerings had been leading to this. The miracle child required the ultimate price. Before he could react, he felt Agnes's claw-like grip seize his arm with impossible strength.
"Be honored, Father," she hissed almost tenderly. "Your blood shall ensure the child's birth."
Caleb lurched back, but from the shadows between the stones, shapes emerged. Gaunt women in tattered shawls, their eyes reflecting the torchlight like feral animals. Half a dozen of them, wringing him. Cold hands grasped his wrists and shoulders, forcing him to his knees before the altar. "Lila!" he cried out, voice breaking with panic. "Lila, run!" Lila only turned her head weakly toward him. She looked pale, sweating, her pupils huge and black. The knife trembled in her hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's the only way." With a wail of anguish, Lila raised the blade and plunged it into Caleb's chest. The pain was white-hot and all-consuming. Caleb gasped as the world lurched, blood blossoming warm and wet through his shirt. He stared at his wife in disbelief and agony. Lila drew the knife out with shaking hands, and Caleb slumped onto his back on the cold ground. His blood cascaded over the altar stone, spilling into the thirsty earth. Above him, the cloaked women began a low, ululating chant. Agnes raised her arms to the sky, her face alight with dreadful ecstasy as she called out in that ancient tongue. The very air vibrated with power. The circle of stones seemed to shiver. The blood-soaked vines around the altar suddenly writhed to life. With a wet, slithering sound, they snaked outward and coiled around Caleb's twitching limbs. He had no strength to fight them. As his vision swam, he beheld an abomination stirring in the gloom beyond the altar. It was as though the entire forest had grown a singular, malignant form. A colossal silhouette of twisted boughs and coiling tendrils rose up against the darkness. It was neither tree nor beast, but something in between. An eldritch being woven of root and shadow. Dozens of luminous eyes opened across its knotted surface, their pale gaze all fixed upon him. Caleb's mind reeled. The sight was beyond human comprehension, a horror too vast to grasp. He tried to scream, but blood bubbled in his throat. The vines hauled him across the dirt toward the altar. A yawning fissure split open in the earth at the base of the stones. A gaping maw lined with jagged roots dripping with sap-like saliva. The fetid reek of decay and sweet moss poured from that impossible mouth. Caleb's fading heart thundered with primal terror as the tendrils lifted his body over the chasm. In his final moments, through a haze of pain, he understood the ultimate truth. This thing that loomed over them was the ancient god of the wood, and to it, human lives were as insignificant as ants. It devoured and bestowed life with equal indifference, an unfathomable cycle, older than time. He could only gurgle a broken sob as the vines let him drop. The forest god consumed Caleb in one swift, hideous motion. A surge of coiling darkness, a wet crunch, and Caleb was gone, swallowed into the dripping earth. At that very instant, Lila arched her back atop the altar with a cry. A great shudder passed through the clearing as if the woods themselves exhaled. Lila's child slipped from her womb without effort, sliding into Agnes's waiting arms amid a torrent of blood. A weak newborn wail rose into the cold night air. The chanting ceased. The grove fell eerily silent, broken only by the infant's thin cries. The towering silhouette of vines and eyes receded back among the trees, melting into the forest as if it had never been, yet a lingering presence, a heaviness, remained. The circle of midwives dispersed like phantoms, vanishing into the dark. Agnes stood alone at the altar, lifting the newborn gently and wrapping him in Lila's shawl. Lila, half conscious, reached out feebly. "My baby," she whispered. Agnes placed the squalling bundle into Lila's trembling arms. He was a boy, rosy, vigorous, and impossibly perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, not a single blemish or bruise upon him. He quieted almost at once against Lila's breast, his cries subsiding into an oddly alert silence. The child's eyes fluttered open, fixing on Lila. In the wavering torchlight they appeared as two lightless pools of obsidian. Lila stared into those eyes, and a splinter of fear pricked her elation. The infant's gaze was unsettlingly steady, unblinking. "Caleb?" Lila mumbled, her thoughts fogged and body weak. She cast her eyes about for her husband as if expecting him to be standing nearby. The clearing was empty except for Agnes and the faint copper scent of spilled blood. Reality crashed down upon Lila then, the memory of what she had done and what she had allowed to happen, and she let out a keening wail that echoed through the black trees. When the sun's first rays filtered wanly into the clearing, Lila was found wandering at the forest's edge, barefoot, bloodied, and clutching her newborn to her chest. A group of neighbors on an early morning errand spotted the young woman swaying down the road, and they rushed to her side. Lila's dress was stiff with dried blood, and her eyes were distant and hollow. She mumbled a half-coherent tale of a bear attack in the woods when asked about Caleb's absence. Horrified and sympathetic, the townsfolk hurried Lila and the child to the doctor's house. A quiet funeral was held for Caleb a few days later, though no body was ever recovered from the woods. Lila stood at the graveside in a daze, numb and distant, clutching her flawless, black-eyed baby against her shoulder. The villagers whispered of her tragedy and fragile state of mind, vowing to help the young widow through the dark times ahead. Lila thanked them softly, but in her heart she felt only a yawning emptiness and a creeping dread she dared not name. In the following months she kept to herself as her son grew at an unsettling pace, crawling and then toddling far earlier than any child should. On some moonlit nights, Lila awoke to find him standing in his crib, peering through the bedroom window toward the woods, an angelic smile on his lips that never touched his lightless eyes. Lila tried to pray. She tried to convince herself that the nightmare was over, that her sacrifices had won her a normal life at last. She never again set foot near Black Hollow Wood, yet the forest did not forget her. On certain nights, when the clouds hung oppressively low and the air was thick with the scent of damp rot, she would hear a rustling just beyond her doorstep, as if something heavy and slow was dragging itself through the fallen leaves. In those moments, Lila's blood would run cold, for she knew something waited out there in the darkness. Not for her, perhaps, not yet. It was waiting for him. One cool summer evening, as the boy slept fitfully in her arms, Lila found herself humming a lullaby, the same plaintive tune she had crooned before all the horror unfolded. Her voice cracked as she fought back tears of guilt and grief and love. The baby's eyelids drooped. In that liminal haze between waking and dream, his gaze drifted past her, fixing on the window and the tree line beyond, barely visible against the starry sky. Lila could have sworn that in the depths of her son's dark eyes, a faint light flickered, a reflection of the rising moon, or perhaps a glint of some watchful intelligence, deep and ancient, stirring beyond those onyx pupils. Far beyond the yard, at the threshold of the silent woods, 2 points of light flared briefly and disappeared, like eyes blinking slowly shut. The night was vast and unknowable, the indifferent stars glinting above. Lila held her flawless child close, unaware of the ageless creature that now dwelt behind those innocent eyes, patiently awaiting the next turning of the cycle.